Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I work at the local newspaper, which means I spend a lot of time observing and writing about people in our community. Sometimes this leads to interesting situations, like what happened at my neighborhood supermarket about 4 to 5 years ago. I was actually there to pick up some snacks for our evening deadline but ended up witnessing quite a scene instead. I was standing in line at the checkout, and from my position, I could see most of the store since it was pretty small. That's when this woman walked in with her kid, who looked around 5 or 6 years old. Right away, I noticed something off about how she was handling things. She just grabbed a basket and let her kid run wild through the store. The employees were clearly struggling to keep an eye on the kid while trying to do their jobs. He was running up and down the aisles, touching everything, and making their lives difficult. I felt bad for them, but what happened next was even worse. I suddenly heard this horrible coughing sound from the aisle behind me, followed by crying and then the unmistakable sound of someone throwing up. One of the employees rushed over to help, and I turned around to see what was happening. The kid was on the floor, and next to him was an open pack of chocolate-covered peanut candies. His face was all red and puffy, and he was sweating profusely. It was pretty obvious he was having some kind of allergic reaction. His mother came running over, still clutching her shopping basket, and that's when things really went off the rails. She immediately started yelling at the employee, demanding to know what they were doing. Before the employee could even finish addressing her, she accused them of poisoning her son. The employee tried to explain that they had found her son eating candy and heard him getting sick, but she just screamed louder about them selling poisoned candy. The crazy thing was, while she was screaming about poisoned candy, she wasn't even looking at her kid. The store employees showed more concern for him than she did. They were giving him water and trying to help him cough up the candy he'd eaten. The employee attempted to explain to her that her son might be allergic to peanuts, but she just responded by threatening to call the police. She didn't even think about asking for a first aid kit or calling for the manager. She went straight to threatening to call the police. Then, if you can believe it, she grabbed her kid and tried to leave the store without paying for anything in her basket. Luckily, the manager had come out by this point and managed to stop her before she could reach the exit. The manager told her she needed to wait for the police since she had called them herself. The mother completely lost it at this point, accusing them of harassment and demanding to know why they even stocked peanuts in their store in the first place, insisting they should have somehow known about her child's allergy. The manager just stood there waiting for the police to arrive. When they did show up, the mother tried to spin this whole story about being poisoned, but the manager simply told them that the woman had attempted to shoplift. Given how she'd been acting, the police seemed much more inclined to believe the manager's version of events. The kid was doing better by this point, though there was still a fresh puddle of vomit on the floor. The police told the mother she needed to come down to the station after making sure her son was okay. To top it all off, the manager banned her from ever coming back to the store. I ended up writing about the incident for our local paper's crime blotter section, though I kept it brief and left out names to protect the kid. It's amazing how some people will try to turn their own negligence into everyone else's fault, and even try to use it as cover for shoplifting. My days as a delivery driver for a sandwich shop were mostly uneventful, except for that one incident that turned into a month-long nightmare. I was working at this place, let's just say it rhymed with Timmy Tom's, to help pay for my college tuition. The job was straightforward: make sandwiches, deliver them, collect tips. The only real hassle was our location, which was right next to a busy coffee shop drive-through. Getting in and out of our parking lot was like playing Russian roulette with your bumper. One afternoon I was backing out for a delivery, taking it super slow because of the usual chaos. There was a car parked next to me and I watched its driver get in. I kept inching backward and suddenly, this woman whips her car out behind me while I'm still moving. There was a tiny bump, barely enough to feel, and a scratch on her car no bigger than a dime. What happened next was like watching someone transform into a rage monster over a paper cut. Karen immediately started screaming hysterically about her car being hit. She began shouting for someone to get her husband, who was apparently inside the coffee shop. When I tried to explain that she had pulled out behind me while I was still moving, she cut me off and started yelling for Kevin even louder. Her husband stormed out of the coffee shop, coffee still in hand. He demanded to know what I had done to their car. I tried explaining that I had been backing out very slowly, but before I could finish, Karen interrupted by dramatically claiming that I had smashed into their car. Kevin then started lecturing me about how expensive their luxury vehicle was. I was young and still pretty green when it came to dealing with conflict. At that point, I hadn't even processed that this was the same car that had been parked next to me. I thought somehow I backed into someone else entirely. I went inside to get my manager, who'd seen everything through the window. He came out with me and I felt relieved, thinking he'd clear everything up. But Karen and Kevin had already called the police. The officer showed up, looked bored, and simply said, since this happened on private property, he couldn't assign blame. He then asked Karen and Kevin for their side of the story. After listening to their dramatic retelling, he just left without even asking for my side or my manager's account. My manager helped me file an insurance statement over the phone. The entitled couple suddenly turned sugary sweet. Karen cheerfully commented about how these things happen and wished me a good day, while Kevin assured me they'd let the insurance handle everything from there. My manager warned me not to speak directly with their insurance, and when they called, I directed them to my insurance company. That's when things got weird. Kevin started showing up at my workplace almost daily, but only when I wasn't there. My co-workers told me he'd storm in, ranting about how I was insurance dodging. When I was working, he'd just stand outside staring through the windows like some discount horror movie villain. Then he started following me on deliveries, every single day. For a month, we learned from the coffee shop staff that Kevin was basically squatting there all day. He was too cheap to pay for internet at home, so he'd camp out at their shop for his graphic design work. He'd buy one tiny coffee and demand they turn down their music, making such a fuss that they'd mark their volume dial with a pencil just to avoid his tantrums. When my insurance finally called, they had some interesting questions. They wanted to know if I'd seen Karen recently. Turns out, she was claiming the dime-sized scratch had given her whiplash, post-traumatic stress disorder, and left her unable to walk. Kevin was doing all the talking because she was supposedly too injured to come to the phone. Mysteriously, there were no medical records to back up any of these claims. Because of the useless police report, my insurance had to rule in their favor, but they only got enough to cover a new paint job. The insurance company made Kevin put Karen on the phone and warned them that if the harassment didn't stop, they'd take legal action. That finally got them to back off. They tried suing my company too, since I had the car topper on during the incident, but that went nowhere. Here's where it gets good though. About 6 months later, I got a call from my old insurance agent. Turns out Karen and Kevin had been arrested. This wasn't their first rodeo. It was their 6th insurance scam that year. They'd been purposely causing minor accidents and then trying to milk the insurance companies for all they could get. The coffee shop's security cameras had caught every single one of their previous scams in their parking lot. They'd been using the same spot for months, pulling the same stunt on different delivery drivers. The footage showed Karen and Kevin practicing their routine, her perfectly timing her pullout to cause minimal contact, him rushing out of the coffee shop right on cue. They're facing insurance fraud charges now. Guess Kevin won't need to worry about Wi-Fi anymore. I hear prison provides free internet these days. I work as a mechanic at a small auto shop and I've always been pretty good at fixing up my own vehicles. Recently, my truck got into a nasty encounter with a deer that left the passenger side fender looking like it went through a war zone. Getting a new one from the dealership would have cost me an arm and a leg, so I started looking around online for used parts. After searching for a while, I found this guy on OfferUp who was parting out his truck, same make, same model as mine, and the fender was in perfect condition. He was only asking for a quarter of what the dealership wanted. The only catch was that I had to drive up to Vancouver to get it. My roommate, who's also into cars, offered to come along and help me get the panel off. We figured Vancouver traffic would be brutal, so we left super early. The guy told us he wouldn't be home until 6 p.m. after work, but we ended up arriving around 5:20 p.m. I messaged him on OfferUp, letting him know we were early and would wait. We found a nice spot to park across the street from his house. It was a quiet neighborhood with a few people walking their dogs or doing yard work. Nobody seemed to mind us being there. I even waved at a couple of people who walked by, and they waved back. About half an hour into our wait, I noticed a car pull up a few houses ahead of us. A woman got out, but I didn't think much of it. My roommate and I were just chilling, watching some funny videos on my phone to pass the time. That's when things got weird. I noticed movement in my peripheral vision and saw this woman doing this strange stalker walk toward our truck. She'd take a few steps, stop, stare at us, then take a few more steps. It was so bizarre that I had to nudge my roommate to look. When she finally reached our passenger window, she had this look on her face like she'd caught international spies in the act. Then she started talking with this Valley Girl accent that seemed really out of place for someone who had to be at least in her mid-30s. Using her Valley Girl accent, she demanded to know what we were doing there. I simply told her we were waiting for somebody. She immediately responded by saying she was about to call the cops because she thought we were stalking her since we'd been sitting there for so long. My roommate and I exchanged looks that practically screamed, "Is this lady for real?" I tried to keep things light and diffuse the situation. I told her I understood her concern about safety, then pointed out the red truck across the street, explaining that we were waiting for its owner to get home because I wanted to buy parts from him since he was selling the truck in pieces on OfferUp. There was this super awkward pause before she responded. She went on about how she didn't know us and emphasized that this was a close-knit neighborhood. She made a point to mention our Oregon license plates and said she wanted to make sure we weren't scoping her out. She also claimed they had a neighborhood watch program. I assured her again that we were just there to buy a fender panel and nothing else. She responded with an awkward okay, before walking away. She got in her car and drove off. When the truck owner finally got home, we told him about our encounter with a weird lady. He looked confused and told us he'd lived there for 5 years and had never seen anyone matching her description in the neighborhood. The funny thing is, we later found out from one of his neighbors who came over to chat while we were removing the fender that the neighborhood didn't even have a watch program. Apparently, the woman was known for hassling people in different neighborhoods, pretending to be part of their community watch programs. She'd been caught doing this in at least 3 other areas, and the local police were already aware of her behavior. The neighbor showed us a community Facebook post warning others about her. Turns out she just drove around different neighborhoods acting like she owned the place, harassing anyone she deemed suspicious. She didn't live in any of these neighborhoods. She had an apartment on the other side of town. We got our fender panel and left. The truck owner and his neighbor both ended up reporting her to the police again, adding our encounter to her growing list of harassment complaints. For context, I'm a 14-year-old girl, and I've been saving up my allowance for months to buy this really special hat from my favorite YouTuber. It wasn't just any merchandise, it was from a limited edition collection, and I was so excited when it finally arrived. I spent almost 1 hour that morning getting my hair perfect to wear with the hat. You know those days when your hair finally cooperates? Yeah, it was one of those rare moments. I was at Target with my friend and his mom, who were shopping for a baby shower gift. We split up in the store. His mom went to look at cribs while we wandered around the baby clothes section. That's when this kid, probably around 9 years old, came bouncing up to me. He immediately started asking if he could have my hat. I politely declined, but the kid just wouldn't take no for an answer. He started insisting that he should get the hat simply because he liked it. The kid started stomping his feet like he was having a full-on tantrum in the middle of the store. My friend had to step in, telling the kid that I had already said no. The kid got all pouty and ran off. Next thing I know, someone grabbed my wrist and literally spun me around. There she was, the final boss of all Karens, complete with the signature haircut and everything. She must have been around 40, but that scowl on her face aged her about 10 years. I asked her what the heck she thought she was doing, which only made things worse. She immediately started yelling at me about using inappropriate language around her little angel. My friend tried to intervene, telling her to leave me alone, but she wouldn't listen. Instead, she demanded that I give my hat to her son to make up for my supposed bad behavior. When I refused, this woman, this grown adult, actually reached out and ripped the hat right off my head. All my careful hairstyling just went completely to waste in seconds. I lost it at that point, yelling at her about messing up my hair and demanding to know what was wrong with her, reminding her how long it had taken me to style it. I snatched my hat back, which set her precious little angel off crying like someone had just canceled Christmas. Karen's face turned red, and I swear I could see steam coming out of her ears. But before she could explode, a Target employee showed up and asked what was going on. That's when Karen switched to victim mode faster than a chameleon changes colors. She immediately accused me of stealing her son's hat. I was so shocked by the lie that I just dropped my hat. My brain completely shut down. I couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't do anything. How do you even defend yourself against something so completely untrue? Just then, my friend's mom finally found us and asked me what was wrong. I must have been completely zoned out because the next thing I knew, I was being handcuffed by a security officer who had apparently been in the store. He picked up my hat and handed it to Karen, who had the most smug look on her face. I tried to protest my innocence, but the officer just dismissed me with a comment about how teens were always lying. That's when my friend stepped in, saying he had proof. My friend pulled out his phone. This absolute legend had started recording as soon as Karen showed up because he had a feeling something bad might happen. He captured the whole thing on audio. The officer listened to the recording, and suddenly those handcuffs were coming off my wrists and going onto Karen's instead. You should have heard her. She started screeching like a car with bad brakes. I never got an apology from the officer, but honestly, I didn't care. I got my hat back, and watching Karen get led away while throwing her adult tantrum was worth more than any apology. My friend's mom drove us home after that, and we couldn't stop talking about how crazy the whole thing was. Later, my friend told me that while I was having my panic shutdown moment, the officer had been asking me questions, but I wasn't responding at all. That's why he thought I was being difficult and decided to cuff me. Thank God my friend had the presence of mind to record everything. The whole experience was wild, but at least I got my hat back, and Karen got what she deserved. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.